I was in London basically traveling. I then found myself with a job contract, which was very exciting. So obviously I needed to live in London. I knew London was really competitive, and I knew that if I wanted to live here in October, I should probably start looking in September. So that's kind of what I did. Weirdly, first inspection off the bat was this place, and I fell in love with it because it is just so cool. And it looks like a Mary Poppins house, which is a very specific aesthetic that I loved. And yeah, so kind of got that ball rolling. Suddenly realised that my referencing was going to be really difficult because I'm Australian, and at the time I was on a tourist visa, and tourists can't rent property. So even though I had the opportunity to work in London, I didn't have a working visa yet. But Anthony was so helpful to explain kind of all the things I needed. He told me where to go and what to do and what documents to provide. And he kind of held my hand through that whole process. And now suddenly it's October and I have a house in London. I did, because I emailed a lot of different real estate agencies around, and I didn't really get much response. They kind of all told me, oh, you actually can't rent because you're Australian, tough luck. Whereas Martin, Gerard and Anthony really kind of understood what I was saying and understood that even though I didn't have the right visa, I was clearly on that path. And so they really helped me figure out the process instead of just kind of throwing me in the deep end and saying swim. Anthony just made it really, really simple. You know, he answered every call that I called him with. He answered all his messages on time. At one point he answered the phone and said, just give me a minute because I need to put the kids in the car. And I was like, oh my God, I'll call you back later. But no, he's just a very attentive agent. And he also remembered details about my situation, which was really refreshing because it kind of gets frustrating having to rehash, this is the situation, this is what's happening, here's all my details. Whereas he knew off the bat, when I sent him an email, sent him a text, he knew the situation and then could just help me straight away. I think the biggest reason why I decided to put my trust in Anthony and also Martin Gerard as a whole is that I knew who I was talking to. You know, I met Anthony in person a few times. I also got familiar with the person I was emailing and messaging, which is just so refreshing. I think in the decade I've been renting in Australia, I've met my actual real estate agent probably twice, which is the day I moved in and the day I moved out. And other than that, it was just kind of a faceless person over email. Whereas having an actual person to talk to and a voice to kind of recognize, you know, every time I got a phone call saying we need this piece of paper or a little bit of information, I knew who was on the other end of the phone. So it was much less intimidating and much less scary. So I think that's the best part of having someone like Anthony and a company like Martin Gerard help. Anthony actually mentioned to me that his wife is Australian as well. So when I was kind of crying on the phone about, I don't know what to do with this visa, he was speaking from personal experience when he told me what to do. He wasn't just telling me, I'll try this thing. He was actually telling me from his own life experience, which of course he didn't have to do. That's not part of the job requirement. But that sort of above and beyond tendency that Anthony has, that Martin Gerard as a company have, made it much more comforting to me as a tenant, I guess. Once I think everyone at Martin Gerard realised that my case was a bit more unique and required a bit more paperwork to go through, immediately Anthony was on the phone to me. He was emailing me, making sure that I knew not only that Martin Gerard was taking care of it, but also him as the area manager was going to make sure this all happened for me. And I don't think that would have happened at a different kind of agency. They would have kind of left it to the junior agent and just not done anything after that. So it was so refreshing to have someone whose typical day job isn't really handling kind of smaller tenancy agreements to step up and help me in this case. He was really there for me and he validated my kind of fears and my questions. He didn't treat me like someone who didn't know what I was doing. He treated me like an equal. He treated me like someone who has a rental history, who knows what it is to be a tenant, but at the same time, someone who has no knowledge of the UK. And the way that he approached teaching me about the UK felt really refreshing because it wasn't condescending in any way, shape or form. It was just honest. He knew everything about kind of Camden, this area. He was able to kind of point me towards very, like he mentioned, so their offices are in Kentish Town, and he was able to tell me how to get there in a way that, as a person who doesn't know London at all, I got there and I managed to figure it out. And that's something that's really, really helpful, particularly for an international person who doesn't know anything about London. He was a really amazing resource and really knowledgeable, but again, didn't condescend to me in sharing that knowledge. I think larger estate agencies have a blueprint and a template, and usually now it's kind of an online platform where you submit all your documents, you type in your name, you type in your information, and there's not even a person that looks at it. It's just a robot that says yes or no. And that works like 90% of the time. But for that 10% where your information doesn't match up, or your documentation is different, or like me, your driver's license isn't from the UK, suddenly those automated systems fail. And I think the larger companies that I reached out to, in my case, turned away from an Australian because they didn't have a system in place to check and verify my information because it was outside of their normal. Whereas Martin Gerard was kind of game on and was very willing to accept that, okay, these documents aren't what we're used to, but they're still legal documents. So they took a chance and they verified all of my information really, really quickly. And after someone who was literally looking end of August, start of September, we're now in the end of October and I have an apartment. Or I have a house, it's not an apartment. So this house in Camden, which is like the arts precinct of London as I get it, it's a proper family home. I have a kitchen, I have a really nice sized bedroom and a bathtub. And these are things that I've always said were part of my kind of dream home, right? The goal for when I'm 30, 40, 50. And so to find a rental that fit those criteria, a rental in my price range, and then to get it, I wouldn't have done that without Anthony or without Martin Gerard, right? This property and this area is so inherently competitive. There are so many people who would probably sell a kidney to live in a house like this. And thanks to Martin Gerard, I managed to call it mine. The reason that I'm giving my time to do this testimonial is basically because I am very aware of how much personal time Anthony and Martin Gerard, Anthony himself actually, gave up to handle my case and gave up to take care of me and my tenancy and to make sure that I had a home. And I am very, very grateful for that. And this is a small way that I can show that gratitude. Any younger person renting, any international person renting or buying particularly, I think Anthony is just a wealth of knowledge and so personable. And Martin Gerard as a company clearly have the capability and the expertise to take care of someone who is an atypical tenant, right? International humans are different than UK locals, right? Like, even though I'm the same kind of person, my paperwork is fundamentally different, and I don't think other agencies would have handled it as well or with as much care as Martin Gerard and Anthony did.